Hello everybody, my name is Harry and welcome to Tiny Deltarune Details, a series on an indie role-playing game that you guys suggested en masse. Okay, so the first chapter is never usually that bad in any of the games. Today in Tiny Deltarune Details, we're taking a dive into the Dark World. More specifically, the very first Dark World we experience in Deltarune Chapter 1. Not the unused classroom Dark World. I'm talking about the very beginning of Rousey's Castletown Dark World. This weird grey, cliff-like area that we appear at the beginning. There are a few interesting details and a whole load of mysteries to talk about in this area. So let's just get on with it, shall we? Firstly, and possibly the most intriguing part of this area, is that it looks like it expands further than what we can access at the beginning of the game. There are at least two inaccessible alternate paths that look to lead into further parts of this area. There's this one that Lancer escapes up, and then there's this one here with a ledge, just like the other ones that Chris can slide down, suggesting there's an area up there that someone else slid down from. So overall, this does give me the impression that this area does extend much further than what we get to explore at the beginning of Chapter 1. Lancer must have gone somewhere in this moment, so I think it's reasonable that there's at least one extra room north of this room, and the location above here could be the path that Susie took. I suppose it's possible that her and Chris started in different parts of this Dark World. We do only encounter Susie after dropping down into this section after that ledge, possibly because she never actually set foot in the same area that Chris did prior to this. She possibly started in her own section. There is some existing precedent that lighteners might start in different locations in a given Dark World. In Chapter 2, Noelle is ahead of Chris and Susie in the cyber world. You could argue that this is because Noelle was inside the Dark World longer than Chris and Susie, which does make more sense. What doesn't make as much sense though is that we don't see Birdley until much later in the chapter. You'd think if Noelle and Birdley entered the Dark World at the same time and ended up in the Dark World near each other, that we would have probably encountered them at similar times. So my interpretation of this is that Birdley probably started in a different section of the Dark World. All of that anyway was to prove that lighteners probably can start in different locations than each other. Either way, no matter of any of this, there is likely another area north of this room where Susie came from. I think that is pretty solid. So there's at least two implied extra rooms that we haven't been able to access. There is also one other very strange interaction regarding this starting area. In Chapter 2, after restoring Castletown and exploring a bit, Mr. Society, this NPC, can be found at the bottom of this cliff here. The cliff that notably leads up into this mysterious area. After interacting with him here, he floats above into that area. To me, this seems like a huge hint that this area will probably be accessible in some sense in the future, or at least be mentioned again. If Mr. Society gets to go up there, then so should we. If nothing else, it brings more attention to this location. If Toby wanted us to forget about it and it to be not brought up ever again, then why would he include an NPC that directly references it? To me, it sort of seems like he wants us to keep this beginning area in the back of our minds. So it makes me wonder then, might we return to this starting area at some point later in the game? So I wouldn't be surprised if we did return here or to a similar area like this later in the game. And at this time, we may have gained an additional ability or something that lets us somehow explore these unseen areas. I mean, it does seem to be part of the same Dark World as Castletown is, which which we do have access to throughout the game, so I don't think it's unreasonable that we might access this other part of the same exact Dark World. What's slightly weird about this whole starting locations in Dark Worlds thing is that when we first enter the supply closet in Chapter 1, we end up in this starting area, but then in Chapter 2 we appear in a newly added entrance south of Castletown. So I wonder why the entrance changed between chapters here. Is there any lore or story reason for it? Did Rouse do this? Did the Dark World just morph for some reason? Or could this simply be a change for the ease of gameplay? Maybe it's because Chris and Susie have already entered Castletown once? In Chapter 4, we did have a slight glimpse at some more of these portals out of Dark Worlds, these beams of light, and they seem to represent actual beams of light in the light world that are sort of entering into the Dark World. To be honest, I don't know if there are any concrete rules as to how this stuff works. I think it's kind of just vibes based sometimes. The Dark Worlds themselves are very malleable places, so it doesn't really affect much. Toby, as the writer, has quite a lot of leeway as to how he wants Dark Worlds to work in any given moment. All of that aside, if you recall, in Chapter 4, Chris does actually gain a new ability that does augment their movement, the climbing claws. I think it's very possible that this item will allow Chris to scale this wall outside of Castletown. It's very interesting to me that after we acquire the climbing claws in Chapter 4, we only get access to a very small section of Castletown after that point. It's almost like there may be a certain part of Castletown that Toby does not want us accessing yet. I'm not saying that this cliff is climbable in Chapter 4, but it's possible that maybe in future chapters when we return to Castletown, we might be able to scale this cliff. And obviously Toby does not want us going there just yet. If we do climb up here in future chapters, the climbing claws could allow us to climb to these other higher points that we didn't have access to previously, that perhaps lead to further rooms. And of course in Chapter 4, the areas that you can climb on have specific tiles that are very obviously climbable. Maybe some extra tiles of this type get added into these earlier areas. I think that's also possible. They could definitely add more of these gameplay elements to these earlier areas. What might actually take place or be in these rooms, I couldn't begin to guess. It could be story important, or it could just be a little secret for players who are thinking outside the box. I'm not fully sold on this climbing claws idea, but I think it's possible. So we've talked about the possibility of returning to these areas, but now we have to discuss what actually is this area. This section certainly doesn't resemble the inside of a closet that much. The save points in this area call it 6 question marks, so not much to go on there, but the music track that plays here is called The Cliffs, so I'll be referring to this grey area with that name. 6 question marks though, almost like there's another character in this game with a name that has 6 characters, who is also quite a mystery man. I guess Castletown doesn't really resemble the inside of a closet either. Not in the same way that the Card Kingdom mirrors a board game themed world, or how the cyber world mirrors the internet, or how the TV world mimics a TV studio. These Dark Worlds clearly mimic some elements of what they've been inspired by. Castletown does mimic the functionality of a closet, however, a lot more so than the Cliffs does. Castletown effectively allows for storage of darkness from various Dark Worlds. This is seemingly the only place that they can survive once their Dark World closes. So in that sense, the Castletown does act very similarly to a closet. It's a place for storing things. We still don't know what Castletown actually is. We know it has a grand fountain that seems to be made out of pure darkness, whatever that is, but I am thinking that it is in some way inspired by the functionality of a closet. I guess the cliffs themselves are quite dusty. I mean, there are piles of Azrael's dust everywhere. That would match up with the inside of a barely used closet. It still slightly vexes me as to why it manifested as cliffs in particular. It suggests that there's some sort of elevation inside there, that there's something that's high up. Maybe this area could represent the higher shelves of the closet, in a similar way to how it seems that at the beginning of the cyber world, we are descending from the top of the table in the computer lab to the floor. So maybe that's why it's all sort of barren and dusty, because we're traversing dusty shelves. Or maybe I'm thinking about this way too much. If nothing else, we can presume that the dustiness and general barren nature of this area definitely reflects the dustiness of the real closet in the light world. My next concern here then is, what the heck are these wobbly things? When I first played chapter 1, these suspicious swaying secrets were one of the main things that stood out to me here. But it turns out that they probably aren't too important. If you make Chris get hit multiple times by the bullets that these guys shoot, the next save point you interact with reads, "For some reason, you punished yourself with the spores." I'm assuming that the word spores here is referring to the bullets that they shoot rather than the wobblers themselves, as it is what Chris got hit by. So, spores. These guys shooting spores could imply these wobbly things are fungi of some kind. So mushrooms maybe, or mold perhaps? Was this Dark World secretly made in J.K. Rowling's front room all along? In all seriousness, these wobbly things are likely just the Dark World forms of mold, which just further adds to the vibe that this area is totally barren and desolate. And it definitely adds to the unsettling air this place has. I do really like them though, they make funny sounds. When I first started writing this video, chapter 3 and 4 actually hadn't come out yet, and to my surprise they did actually add a lot more fuel to this video. The intro area to chapter 3's Dark World looks remarkably similar to chapter 1's. It has a similarly muted colour palette, the vibe is fairly desolate, and it has similar dust piles and wobbly things. I had a half-baked idea that this appearance manifests when a Dark World is freshly created, maybe because the Dark Fountain hasn't had enough time to fully adjust to the area yet, that it manifests as this sort of blank expanse. I don't really like this idea as much now though, because there isn't really any evidence to support it. We have no idea how long the Castletown Fountain has been open, and there's actually a bit of evidence that by the time we see it, chapter 3's Dark World has already been open for quite a while. It seems that it's been open for at least long enough for Chris to have an off-screen discussion with Tenor. That idea did lead me onto some interesting lines of thought, which you'll see a little bit later. Chapter 3's intro area likely just looks like this because it's dusty. It's supposed to be carpet and floorboards after all. We also finally got to hear the full version of the Knight's theme in chapter 3, but it instantly sounded familiar to me though, because motifs from this song can be heard throughout chapter 1 and 2's soundtracks. Most notably for our purposes here, pretty much the entirety of the track The Chase is the Roaring Knights motif. This song is first heard in The Cliffs, giving some connection between these areas and the night. We were also given more insight into these eyes, which I've actually neglected to mention so far. They appear in both chapter 1 and 3's starting areas, which is curious, huh? We could have already presumed that they likely had some link to the Titans from their depiction in the Roaring cutscene, but we got pretty explicit confirmation of that in chapter 4. We literally see a Titan fountain being created, complete with identical looking eyes here. The tower that forms when the Titan hasn't fully broken out of the shell yet has a striking resemblance in colour and general texture to the starting area of chapter 1. These massive stone pillars with these eyes emblazoned on them. The colour that darkness turn when they don't fit into a given dark world has a resemblance to both of these elements too. So these areas most likely have some connection to the Night and the Titans then. So it got me wondering, what if this is what dark worlds become when they've been created in an area that is abandoned or boring? An area that doesn't have as many elements for the Dark Fountain to be inspired by. Perhaps creating a dark world in one of these locations brings out more raw elements of the dark world. The things that sort of reside underneath the artifice of the regular dark worlds that we see. In these locations where there aren't any wacky characters to be created, you start seeing these large blank pillars of nothing, these vast endless expanses of wooden boardwalks. You start seeing and hearing more visual and auditory motifs relating to the Night and the Titans, both characters that have links to the deeper parts of the dark world. The only thing that brings any sort of life to these areas are dust and fungi. A Titan is what happens when you create a dark fountain inside of a dark world, hinting that when we see a Titan we're sort of seeing a more raw form of what the darkness is. I think that is a compelling idea. So basically what I'm supposing as my theory is that we are basically seeing a more raw form, an unaltered image of the dark world in these locations. They're not a fully raw form yet. They're not dark worlds without any level of inspiration, as these locations still have some things within them that do inspire the dark fountains. Ralsei's Castletown has been inspired by the functionality of a closet, or Tenna's whole TV studio and TV world has been inspired by the television. These areas prevent the dark worlds as a whole from becoming totally barren and lifeless, likely because they're stemming from objects that have more history and love and life put into them by people in the light world. But there are still some areas, some edges of these dark worlds that are barren like this because they're just not cared about as much, I suppose. An alternate interpretation of this is that if these areas are shelves and we've been filling the closet with various items that convert into darkness, could it be that we're physically filling the shelves of this closet? This might actually transform the area in some way. We've already seen that Castletown physically grows once more objects are put into the world here. I don't think it's a stretch to say that other parts of this dark world might change. It's an interesting thought, but has no other evidence to it. I don't know how much this tells us about the overall story or lore, but I just had this interesting idea and had to share it. I guess it could hint that we will be seeing more areas like this in the future, especially as we get closer to the Roaring, and that perhaps that we'll be returning to that initial cliffs area that I talked about as well. Maybe that's the finale area, where we fight the Grand Titan or something. I think sealing the Castletown's Grand Fountain will have to happen. The whole narrative of this game has been about sealing fountains. The fact that there has been this fountain in the Castletown staring us in the face the whole time, I think it will sadly have to be sealed. Ralsei makes it seem like the Castletown Dark World is fine being opened, but the prophecy sort of seems like they should be separate. It says if fountains freed, the roaring cries. It doesn't really hint that it's okay to have one fountain. It says if fountains in general are freed. To me it seems like the sacrifice of the Castletown fountain might have to happen. That means that we will have to return to Castletown as part of the story and perhaps explore the world further. Ralsei's Dark World definitely has the potential to be expanded more. I mean, it would sort of make sense for the narrative to come full circle like that. You gotta love a cyclical narrative. I definitely think there's some importance to the aesthetic of these locations though. And I wouldn't be surprised if in a future chapter, like chapter 5 maybe, or chapter 6 or 7, those Dark Worlds start in a very similar way to chapter 3 and 1's did. But that's kind of it. But I just had a lot of ideas. I just wanted to get this more interesting way of thinking, and I wanted to sort of bring attention to these areas that I think might have been glossed over a little bit with all of the other stuff that's hit us with Deltarune recently. So I hope if nothing else this video has got you thinking. I want to say thank you to my Patreons who were credited at the beginning to get your name there, and other perks like early access to longer versions of videos. You can support over on Patreon or become a member here on YouTube. If you can't do that, you can also give a one-off donation on Ko-Fi. Any form of support would be greatly appreciated, but don't worry if you can't. A like and subscribe on the video also helps greatly. Thank you very much for watching. I hope I've inspired you in some way. I'll see you in whatever the next video is.